people may say when it comes to council services that this is a case of paying more for less. What's your reaction?
Well, I think the last year has been extraordinary for everybody all over the country, and the council is no different in that. What has happened over the last 12 months has been there has been a massive shock to the council's finances, and that comes from the reduction, well, the lockdowns that have created the closure of the Roman baths and the pump rooms and closed off a big source of income for the council, big reduction in parking income, and equally as significant, a big drop in our income from property rentals. The council, as probably everybody knows, is a very big property landlord in Bath, North East Somerset, and we get a lot of income. And the reason that's important, and we reckon we've lost £20 million this year. We reckon we'll probably lose £20 million next year. And if you do the maths, you have to change things to deal with that reality, as any of us would, as the nation will have to in due course. So there are this is the budget that is being put to the council in a few weeks is not a normal budget. And this has not been a normal year that we've just gone through. And the year that we're going into will not be a normal year. And I expect the impacts of this pandemic to be with this council for 2 to 5 years before we come out of it.
Is that suggesting, sorry, Richard, is that suggesting that the proposed increase is going to be an example of the council asking for proposed increases for several years to come?
Well, I think it's too early to say that, but the financial problem we faced this year in building this budget was that we realised when we put the numbers together and we analysed the government grants that we were going to be around £20 million short this year, in the year coming. And that's primarily due to that drop in income that I referred to. So we were faced with a choice. First of all, did we think we could save £20 million, given that only 8 months ago, we had to save £20 million in the middle of the pandemic because the income reduction had literally dropped off a cliff. So that's the starting point. And pretty early on, we took a view that trying to achieve £20 million savings, so in other words, £40 million in a year, was just completely impossible, wasn't possible. And the impact on the council services for in all areas would have been devastating. So we decided to do something a little bit unusual. So what we are going to do to make this more manageable is to borrow money from our own reserves. So if you like, it's taking money out of our savings. And the intention is to repay that money over a 5-year period so that in 5 years on, the reserves are at the same level, but we've been able to smooth out the turbulence in our finances. And hopefully by that time, the income will have returned because the pandemic will have receded. So this has never been done before. And there were only 2 options. One was to do that, and we were lucky to be able to do that because we had the reserves available. The other was to go to the government and say, can we borrow the money from you? And we decided to go for the first choice, internal borrowing, because handing over that borrowing power to the government brought other problems with it, other restrictions on the way we could do things. So that's what we've decided to do. And come back to your question, although the budget will get us through this year, and there are still £8.5 million of savings in there, next year we have to find another 11 million. And that's because we expect the continuing problem of the income drop for the council to be still there. So it's a little bit complicated to kind of unravel that, but the fundamental problem is the same one, that the council has relied for years on the income it generates from those from investments, from parking and from heritage services. And we're pretty, not completely unique, but one of maybe 5 councils in Britain that generate those very large levels of income. And that money is used to pay for many services that people get in Bath North East Somerset. So that's why it's been so difficult for us to, to manage this. And I think probably all of your viewers would know that if there are gradual changes in income and expenditure, generally there's a way to deal with those. You can usually find a way to deal with them. When something is sudden and catastrophic, it's really hard to do that. And that's when you fall back on savings and you use them to get you through that difficult patch. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Richard, £70 plus a year to some Bathonians is going to be a day less skiing on the slopes, but it's going to be an additional burden for many people who are not so well off, especially with the pandemic in mind. What help is there available for them?
Well, I mean, first thing to say is, of course, we do recognise that, and nobody wants to pay more tax than they have to. Before I come on to answer that, I just want to put this in context. The increase overall with council tax and social care precept is £1.40 a week. And of that, 84 pence will go to adult social care. And the money can't be spent on anything else. It goes into that area. And as everybody knows, our most vulnerable communities during the pandemic have been people 70 plus, and those particularly vulnerable people, many of whom are in our care system. So putting extra money into that service at a time of pressure, we feel is completely justified. The general council tax increase, which is just under 2%, so slightly above inflation, amounts to 56 pence a week at Band D. So although I acknowledge what you say, that even that will be difficult for some people, it's a very small amount. But we are doing something to help some of those people. We are going to increase what's called Council Tax Support Scheme, which is basically a locally administered benefit that helps people who can't pay council tax. We're increasing the amount of money that goes into that. And for the very poorest and those in crisis, we're increasing, we put an extra 400,000 into what's called welfare support, which is in essence crisis payments for people who are either on very low or no income and who have a real problem to deal with. So there would be more money in both those pots. I don't think it will go as far as we would like to, but we are pretty boxed in terms of what we can do. But I think we've gone as far as we can on that. And so we think in relation to the actual cost for residents, the increasing cost for residents to bear, what they need to also remember is that we think our council tax levels in Bath North East Somerset will still be at the bottom of unitary councils in the southwest. I think we were third from the bottom last year, and we think we'll stay in the same position.
Can I,
yeah.
Can I just pick my way through some of the proposals that will go before the full council? And these are criticisms that members of the public have made on social media. There are those who say you still are finding money to spend on things like livable neighbourhoods and increasing residence parking. Things that some people are saying will create even more traffic jams. Others are saying you're driving the car out of Bath at a time when when our shops will need as many people coming into Bath as possible, as hopefully the pandemic fades away.
Yeah, well, let me deal with those points. The first thing to say, and this could be a little bit technical, but I'll try and de-technicalize it. The sort of money that will be spent on highway works, whether it's the clean air zone or livable neighbourhoods, those kind of policies, is capital money. And that means that it is not related to the revenue budget, which is what council tax is levied on. So it is, if you like, a separate pot of money for investment into those low traffic initiatives. The reason we've protected that this year is we've been working on these policies for pretty well 2 years to get them to the point where the Cabinet last December approved the policy. And we're now at a stage where we're inviting councillors to submit interest from their wards in this scheme. So what we're intending to do with that whole set of policies around managing traffic, we want to press on with those, and they don't have a direct impact on the council tax that people pay. They have an indirect impact where we have to borrow money, but some of that money comes from the West of England Combined Authority, some from the Department for Transport, and we are merely continuing the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years on that.
And what about the impact on, what about the impact on the high street at a time when our retail industry wants, support?
Yep. Well, let me kind of address that directly. I mean, it's never been the case in recent years that you can drive your car up to the outside of a shop in the centre of the city, park it there, and go into the shop. That's never been hasn't been the case for years. The availability and access of city centre car parks will still be there, and people will still be able to come into the city. What we believe, though, is that what will make Bath City in particular a more attractive place ultimately for visitors, residents, will be a wider restrictions on vehicle access into the city centre. Now, some people have conflated that with the current discussions that are going on about security measures in the city centre. The two things are not the same. And it must be obvious to most people that the city centre is now in a hybrid position where many roads are closed off to vehicles already and have been for years, and that there are still some open. And the intention over the next year or so is to create a more coherent pattern within the city centre. And that's what we've been consulting on. As far as the retail, so taking the impact on retail businesses, there is no evidence nationally that pedestrianisation or vehicle reduction schemes in city centre locations actually leads to a fall in retail trade. In fact, the opposite is generally found in the studies, that where you have vehicles and pedestrians separated and not mixed up, you actually get higher footfall, and footfall is ultimately what retail businesses rely on. So I would say that, but I'd also say the council is, and this is included in the budget, we are still pressing ahead with the works to regenerate Midsummer Norton High Street, Keynsham High Street, and we are doing quite a lot of work at the moment on how we can regenerate the retail sector in the centre of Bath. And particularly, because this is the hardest hit area, the area that we're calling the Milsom Quarter, which is the streets immediately surrounding Milsom Street, going over to the river and up to George Street, quite a large area between over to Queen Square. We're looking at specifically what we can do to regenerate that area. And that's important because the council and St John's Trust are the two largest property landlords in that area. And we're working together to come up with some, what I hope will be innovative ideas, which we'll begin to see in the summer for regenerating that whole area. So we are putting effort into supporting retail businesses, and that's included in the budget this year.
Couldn't you just reduce business rates?
No, we can't, because we don't set business rates. The business rates businesses pay are set by the valuation agency, which is a government agency. And basically councils, all they do is collect the business rates. The rates are not set by us. If there are appeals, we are not responsible for determining those. and if there are disputes, we're not responsible. We have to collect the money, but do no more than that. So we don't have that discretion to deal with business rates. And of course, this year, and we'll wait to see what happens, for the whole of this financial year, most businesses have had business rate zero. They've had to pay zero business rates because the government has exempted all businesses. That ends on the 31st of March, and I am rather nervous as to what might or might not follow next, because that also coincides with the end of the current furlough scheme. So I am watching that with some nervousness. I don't think businesses will be out of the pandemic by the end of March, and I think that they will have a problem. So I'm watching that rather nervously, but we'll just have to see. It may be the Chancellor will announce some more assistance in the budget in March. I don't know. I hope he does.
A couple more points raised on social media. There is reference to one-stop shops and libraries reflecting user demand. People are concerned that means reduced hours and fewer staff.
Well, the library service, like any other service, has had to look at its expenditure, and what we've been saying to all services is you need to look for opportunities to, excuse me, to save money. There are issues about the library service. I mean, we are absolutely clear that we want people to have access to library services out of normal working hours when we return to what those are. But we are pretty clear. We do not want to damage the library service, particularly for those people who don't have access to new technology and can't access information in any other way. So I don't think your viewers will see any dramatic change in the library service, but the library service is being asked to make economies like all services.
The thorny question of HMOs came up. People saying that this is a perfect time for introducing a council tax for houses of multiple occupation. Is it as easy as that?
Well, I think the issue is actually not houses multiple occupation. It's students occupying houses multiple occupation. So HMOs where the tenants are students do not have to pay council tax. And that loses university cities like Bath a lot of money. Not that long ago, councils used to be compensated by the government for that lost council tax. But that is one of the many cuts that we've had to endure over the years, and it's slipped away. There is a school of thought that says, actually, students are often not well off. They have to fund their education through loans these days, and the loans are quite expensive, and they shouldn't pay council tax. That was the original thinking behind this. Should they be included in council tax? Well, I think I'm kind of agnostic on this. I think if they are included, the government should compensate cities like Bath that lose that income. We lose a lot of income, awful lot of income. But equally, I think that if you do charge council tax on those properties, you've got to ask that question about how affordable is that for students, who are already struggling. And I think possibly that's not a very good time to be asking this question, because the pandemic has ripped up the rule book, I think, in terms of the loan model, student loan model for education. A lot of students are very dissatisfied that they've had virtually no face-to-face tutorial activity. And a lot of them are beginning to say, why am I paying £9,000 plus a year for an online university education? So I think there's a bigger debate there about the future funding of education. Maybe that's something for another Richard Wyatt interview with perhaps with the university, because it's a really important topic in Bath, particularly.
Two more points. One I think more controversial than the other. The council set up its own development company, Aqueous, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
a lot of controversy, it would seem, about the doings of said development company. I'm not here to level accusations at you, Richard, because I don't want to libel myself, but people are suggesting that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to set up a development company, which is proving to be costly. Would such a development company be easy to dispose of to save the council a fair bit of money?
Well, I think to answer the question, you've got to go back to the reasons it was set up in the first place. And it was set up by the last administration back in 2015, actually. And the purpose, the principal purpose, was to, instead of handing property to the private sector for them to develop, so selling it for them to develop and the return going to those companies, the council at the time decided that if it did it itself, then it would be able to retain profits, and those profits in turn would support council services. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with that model. What I would acknowledge is that, and this probably is not an issue kind of that's particularly of attention in the public domain, is that we have found the arrangements between ourselves and an arm's length company, which of course we are the sole shareholder of. We have found some of that to be quite tortuous and complicated at times. And we are looking at the way, we're currently looking at the way this kind of relationship works, because you're quite right, there have been some instances where people have criticised the decisions that have been made. And we as an administration are not entirely happy that it's as transparent as it should be. As far as the company's own costs are concerned, I mean, that is a matter for the board of directors of Aqueous and their employees. Council does not set those remuneration levels or have any control over the company's finances. Our relationship is principally around whether we are going to dispose of particular properties to them and what return will come to the council if we do that. And if the return is poor or not justified, then we don't hand properties over to Aqueous. But, you know, as I say, this is a model that was introduced by the last administration 5 years ago, and it has evolved and it will evolve further. But I can't say at the moment exactly how we will change things, but we are looking to make some improvements to increase that transparency.
One final question for you. There is mention of a community contribution fund.
Yeah.
What's that? At some point in the past, I suggested to one of your colleagues that Bath should organise its own lottery to raise money. I take it a community contribution fund is not a lottery.
No, it's not. So the idea originated, I think, in London. Two local authorities particularly pioneered this approach, Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea. And really what was being said by those people who live in those council areas is we can afford to pay more than the basic council tax that the council levies. Now, I suppose I should caveat that by saying both Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea have some of the lowest council tax levels in Britain because those councils are heavily supported by central government. But anyway, the principle of the opportunity for residents who could afford to and wish to pay more money into council funds is what we're exploring. And that was discussed by our council last year. There was cross-party agreement we should try this out. And we've always been aiming, once that agreement was made last November, we were always aiming to get literature and information out about that with this year's council tax bills. So that scheme, there will be a lot of information about that in the council tax bills. We'll be launching it if it goes through the, we'll be launching that with the at the end of February. And the way it will work is that if people wish to contribute, there'll be a way that they can do that. And then those funds will not be spent on council services. So what we're saying to people is, you will not have, we will not be subsidising council services through your contributions. And what we'll be looking to do is to direct that money into activities in the community or projects that people think are very worthwhile and very local. So we want to get that money back out into our local communities. It will be very similar in some ways to the funds that all councillors have to spend in their wards, for example. And generally those kind of, those can be very small things, from notice boards to supporting youth centres, to having cleanups done in particular areas. There can be all sorts of things, but that will be the purpose. And we're going to try this next year for the first time. I mean, if it doesn't work, we probably won't continue with it. But if you don't try something, you never know. So that's what that's all about.
Okay, I still maintain the element of chance and a little bit of local gambling would net you a bigger return, but there we go. Richard, thank you very much indeed for your 20 minutes. Actually, it's almost half an hour. I will top and tail this and put it out there, and people can make of it what they will, but thank you for your time.